Hello, and welcome to Up for Debate. In this broadcast, we are working to change our debate format to make it more equal and informative for all involved. Currently, our nation is facing a great challenge, being more divided than ever before, and with the presidential elect being up right now, we are left with many questions. One of those questions being, how trustworthy is mail-in voting? This year, we have had the highest percent of voter turnout since the 1900s, with over 63 million being mail-in voting. My name is Jocelyn Decker, and today we'll be discussing the topic of mail-in voting. Today, the people debating are Caleb Foster for the topic of mail-in voting and Destiny Rung against it. So, before we get into debating, we're going to see what our public thinks on this topic.
Hi, do you know anything about the mail-in voting?
Not really.
Oh, well, basically what it is an absentee ballot, so if you can't go to the actual voting sites, you can send in your vote ahead of time.
Oh,
And there's been a recent uproar in the use of them. So, do you have any opinions on the matter?
Mail in voting is obviously a new thing this year because of COVID 19. Because it's new, it's obviously going to cause some questions, just like anything else. I feel like, as a president or an official, your opinion should be, out of the way. You shouldn't be stating how you feel about it because that could sway voters one way or another. And I don't know, if you want to try it, I say give it a try.
In my opinion, it's kind of a lot of extra steps and it takes longer for the process when you can just go out and do it electronically. I understand it for like the military who are overseas and can't physically get to one. That makes more sense, but I feel like the other people just don't want to really come out and do it.
Hello and welcome back, where we will be debating now the topic of mail-in voting. So currently, we are going to be doing the opening statements. Each person will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to discuss their side completely uninterrupted. Both sides know that if they interrupt, their mics may be shut off. Now, Caleb, will you please start us?
Yes. First off, thank you, Jocelyn, for moderating this debate, and thank you, Destiny, for being here during this debate, and thank you to everybody else who worked so hard to put this together. I cannot thank you enough. Mail-in voting benefits all people, whether or not you choose to use it. It benefits people who physically cannot make it to the polls because of a certain disability. It benefits people who do not have the time to get to the polls because they have a very busy schedule. It benefits people who cannot because they fear the COVID-19 pandemic, which is what made mail-in voting so immensely popular this year. Mail-in voting also benefits people who don't even use it. People who want to vote in person, they'll have shorter and safer lines, given that a lot of voters are turning to mail-in voting. Mail-in voting is also good for the country as a whole. For one, as Jocelyn had mentioned, this election, the 2020 presidential election, has seen a higher turnout than any election in American history, and that is in part due to mail-in voting. However, despite the positive impacts and the reliable history mail-in voting has had for over 100 years, there seems to be claims of fraudulent activity. States like Colorado, Hawaii, and other primarily West Coast states have been using mail-in voting as their primary source of voting for many of the recent elections. And the New York Times posted an article earlier this year stating that the chances of a fraudulent mail-in vote is less than 1%, which mail-in voting is no more fraudulent than in-person voting. In fact, it is a safer and more reliable way of voting for many people who cannot make it to the polls or choose not to go to the polls. Thank you.
Thank you for that opening statement, Caleb. Destiny, you may now speak.
Thank you for joining our episode of Up for Debate. I'd like to take a minute to thank Jocelyn Decker for being our moderator and Caleb Foster for arguing for mail-in voting. With the virus on the loose, there has been a question of how to get Americans to do their civic duty along with feeling safe. So mail-in voting was used widely throughout the election. Yes, mail-in voting has been used before and has been used for a very long time. However, previously the mail-in votes had to be requested and they were not just sent out to everyone. This made the votes way more accurate. Now, mail-in votes are sent to anyone, even if they do not request them, which makes it much more easier for them to be fraudulent, which is why people aren't trusting them with this election. Because if you're not requesting them, what's stopping you from sending them in and then going to vote? So therefore, I'm against mail-in voting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both for those opening statements. Now we'll be moving to our first question. One of the major concerns this election, as already discussed by both of you, has been voter fraud. President Trump has reacted to this by telling everyone to watch the polls and by going to court. Does fraud exist, and what should we do about it to make it less obvious and more reliable? Destiny, you may start this.
There's a difference between the absentee ballots and the mail-in ballots, which is what we use this year. Absentee ballots must be requested, as in this year the votes were sent to people who didn't even request them. They were sent in 39 states, including Pennsylvania, New York, Wisconsin, and many more. They were just sent out to people whether or not they requested them. There were reports of people who received mail-in votes for the dead. In addition, there have been claims that animals have been getting mail-in votes. A family in Atlanta, Georgia received a mail-in vote for their deceased cat. How can we claim that mail-in votes are only slightly less accurate if animals and dead people are getting mail-in ballots? What is stopping people from handing in these votes? Nothing. If roles were reversed, you would not like that either. Everyone just wants a fair election no matter who wins. We just want to make sure the winner gets there fairly because we want our voices to be heard.
I have a question for you, Destiny. Where did you find your information on the
I'm
cat? And
getting there.
is it backed up?
Yes.
All right.
Georgia was not the only state that had this happen. This has happened in many states all across the United States. Not only dead people getting votes along with animals, but so did a lot of underage people as well. This has been a crazy election. As American people, we want everything to go smoothly and just make sure it's being fair. And my sources were the Ballotpedia and Washington Post.
Which facts did you find from each source?
Okay, so Ballotpedia was about how many states you didn't need to request a mail-in voting. And then Washington Post was where I found the dead cat and was one of the sources for the dead cat. There's multiple where it said that deceased people were getting them and underage people were getting ballots for mail-in voting.
All right. Thank you very much for that statement, Destiny. Caleb, would you like to explain your side?
Yes, we all do want a free and fair election, and we want the winner to be chosen fairly, which it was this election. Primarily mail-in votes are no more fraudulent than in-person votes, as I had previously stated. The notion of dead people voting and animals voting. See, you have to be a registered voter for your vote to be counted. They match your signature just like they would when you were at the polling stations. And it's very difficult to commit fraudulent activity mail-in voting. Yes, they may have sent ballots to underage people, and I have never heard the dead animal claim, but I have not researched that particular claim, so I can't disprove it. However, it does sound a bit crazy, but doesn't mean it's not true. I will say this, is that even if they do send the ballots will only be counted if they have a signature to match it with at the polling station, just like they would if you were to go in and vote in person. You'd have to be an already registered voter, and they'd have to match your signature. So they can't just take votes from animals and stuff because they do not have a voting record or a voting certificate, so to speak.
See, Destiny, would you like to respond?
Yes, this is actually the first election that in recent years that you did not have to prove. When you went to vote, you did not need your ID to vote. So how can they match your signature and stuff if you don't, you could walk in, I could walk in claiming to be you. So I feel like your argument, I understand your point of view. I just wanted to put that out there too. And thank you.
So may I respond?
Destiny, where did you find that information?
So my dad and my teacher, and when I was researching, that was one of the big complaints. is how you didn't need to have your ID to prove you were that person. And that was Minnesota Times was one of the places that said that and had one of the claims about that.
All right, Caleb, you may now respond.
They have, if you are not a registered voter, you cannot go into the polling station and vote, nor will your mail-in vote be counted.
The polling.
Destiny, you can respond now.
Okay, thank you. So the thing is, if mail-in voting, who's going to take the time to do all that process? I know we'd like to think that is going to happen. However, people were not allowed. There's been cases where people were not allowed to watch the votes be counted. So how can we be absolutely guaranteed? You cannot.
Oh, all right. Caleb, you may last respond before we go to our next.
Yes, they have poll watchers watching each station from both political parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, watching. And they are within a certain distance due to the pandemic. But this has been an argument from the right since Election Day that they're not allowing people in, when that simply isn't true. People are allowed to watch them count the polls. For instance, Republicans and Democrats, it's not just a one-party thing. And these are not politicians. These are not Republican, Democrat, like senators or congressmen. These are average people. Most of them, actually pretty much all of them, are volunteer, normal, everyday citizens volunteering to count the votes. Why would they go out of their way to rig this election?
There are.
Destiny, one moment. Caleb, do you have any evidence to back that up from specific sites?
Back the fact that they're average voters?
No, before what you said about it before being the going to the stations.
During the election, places like CNN and even Fox News had reported the Trump campaign has come out and said that they are not allowing their people to come in and watch the poll counters, when that is simply not true. If you look at any of the places where the polls were counted, especially contested places like Philadelphia, they had Republicans and Democrats alike both watching over the polls.
Can you give me a specific source that says there are poll watchers present?
I mean, you can look at CNN, you can look at Fox, you can look at MSNBC, NBC, CBS. This is not this election. They've been doing this for most of the recent elections, if not all of them, to make sure that there isn't fraudulent activity happening. This is just mostly common knowledge at this point. But exact sources, you could find them just looking it up.
All right, Destiny, fine. One last rebuttal.
Okay, thank you. Caleb, Fox News Entertainment. They do not have to have facts. And also, you said that there were always people present, yet there are 12 cases currently pending in Pennsylvania where people were complaining they were not permitted to watch these mail-in votes be counted. Yet you stated that people were there to watch. Why would there be 12 cases against that? Because people were not happy. Both parties, Republican and Democrats, have filed cases.
All right, thank you very much for both of that. We need to move on to our next topic right now. But before that, we need to go to our first commercial break. We'll be back after these messages.
There's so much that goes into being a chef, more than just cooking and producing a dish. It's about everything that happens in the kitchen, from start to finish, from cleanup to end, to customers, to the products that you work with. So there isn't one specific answer. Anyone can call themselves a chef, but it really depends on where you are, what you're doing, and the area that you're in. I love working here. As you can see, they redid the dining room for me, so it has a restaurant feel. I've always been in the restaurant business my whole life, and I love working in the industry.
Hello and welcome back to Up for Debate, where we are discussing the topic of mail-in voting. Our last question was about voter fraud. We did a fact check on it, and we could not prove nor disprove any of the facts of poll watchers that were last discussed. But now we are moving on to question number 2. So, one of the other recent events that have happened have shown us that a real thing is vote rejection rate, and that has skyrocketed during this last one. A study at Vex Media found that there were simple things as human error being with the votes, as using the wrong ink, late arrival, or signatures not matching the previous year's records, and not allowing those votes to count and go through. Should those people's votes count? And if so, what should we do to decrease the rate of vote rejection? Caleb, you will start this one.
All right. Yes. For one of the arguments about mail-in voting being more fraudulent, the people who count the mail-in votes are far more particular with counting the mail-in votes, as you had just stated. When you vote in person, you can make mistakes, yes, but most of the time your vote's going to be counted because there's less of an opportunity for you to make that mistake. While with mail-in voting, certain states, if you did not put the envelope in another envelope, then it was discounted, or as you stated, used the wrong ink, or other things that you had stated where they reject it. So mail-in votes are rejected at a higher rate, according to the New York Times, than in-person voting, because they don't necessarily reject people at the polling stations as much as they would reject a mail-in ballot. And yes, this is a problem. If their vote is rejected for the simple fact that it's not their signature and it's not them, then no, obviously that vote shouldn't be counted because it's not that person. But if their vote is being rejected simply due to the fact that they're using the wrong ink or they didn't put the envelope within another envelope, then at that point, there is nothing, that vote shouldn't be rejected due to something small and minor like that. Obviously, there are certain examples when, yes, they shouldn't count the vote, like if you mark down both of the candidates or your signature doesn't match. But small, insignificant things like using the wrong pen ink, no, I don't think that should cause a rejection of the vote.
So, what should we do about it to make that rejection rate go down more?
I think we should take away some of the restrictions, such as the ink and putting the envelope within another envelope. We need to stop being so picky. Yes, obviously, we need to carefully look through each vote to make sure to check the legitimacy of that vote and the signature and the person who mailed it, and making sure they're a registered voter, of course, just as we would with in-person voting. But take away the restrictions such as, oh, well, if you use this pen rather than this pen, or as you stated, like that, or, well, you didn't put this down correctly or something. Then if it's something small and insignificant like that, then they shouldn't reject their vote. And I think that will help the voter rejection problem.
All right. Thank you for that. Destiny?
I agree with a lot of what you said. That's a really good solution. One way, could you actually restate the question? Say it again. I totally just forgot.
All right. The question was, should those votes count that have been rejected due to small minor errors? And what should we do to decrease the amount of rejection rate that mail-in votes have because of that?
If the signature is off, then yes, I feel like it should be rejected because your signature you should be doing rather similar each time. But if it's something small like the ink, no, it should not be rejected because you might not have that pen. And the pen should be provided if they really are going to be that picky. That would be a great way to help solve that issue.
All right. Caleb, would you like to say any more on the topic?
I have no rebuttal.
All right. Thank you for that. Well, let's see what our public opinion has to say on some more topics of the topic of mail-in voting.
I think they're fine. There's a lot of talk of like fraudulence happening, but it's happened in the past. You know, our troops do it when they need to vote. There really is hardly an issue, and there are people who can't attend or shouldn't attend because, you know, of the risk of COVID.
I don't have much of an opinion. I just feel like it's always an iffy thing in my opinion, only because you never know what's gonna happen.
My opinion is it's not the best way to vote because it is open to a lot of fraud.
So if people send their votes in, they can get demolished, destroyed, thrown out, and people can write their own answers on our ballots and just put them back in an envelope. So
York businesses continue to be ravaged by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Many businesses around Western New York continue to feel the impact of COVID-19. However, some businesses are working night and day to come back stronger than ever. Tom and Jason Palumbo started the Sports Locker in 1984, and together, they've been through it all. And 36 years later, they show no signs of slowing down.
Hello and welcome back to Up for Debate. I'm Jocelyn Decker and I'm the moderator for this debate, and we are talking about the subject of mail-in voting. Now we'll be moving on to question number 3. So, COVID restrictions have made it very hard for people to gather in large groups. So some states' solution to that was to open up early voting stations days before the elections. If we have more voting stations, what impact will that have on mail-in voting? Caleb, you may start this one.
So I think opening up more voting stations is an incredibly well idea. That would help with the COVID-19 pandemic, that's for sure. Allowing people to spread out rather than having a large group of people coming together for one polling station. It's really hard to socially distance in that scenario when everyone's packed in one certain area, like certain cities only having like 1 or 2 polling stations. If we had more polling stations, it would greatly reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19, But I think it will lower the number of people that vote by mail, but it will not eliminate that. Due to the fact, like I said, there's other reasons that people would vote by mail, not just because of the fact that they don't live near a polling station or that they don't want to go to a packed-in polling station, and take that risk of, getting coronavirus. Like I said, if they have physical disabilities, opening up another polling station will do nothing for them, so they will still choose to vote by mail, or people in the military will still choose to vote by mail if they so wish. And at the end of the day, opening up polling stations, while it's a good idea, it's not going to completely, eliminate mail-in voting. Mail-in voting is here to stay.
All right, thank you for that. Destiny?
I agree with almost everything you said. If we do have more polling stations, the voter turnout will be even bigger and people will feel more safe doing their civic duty of voting, because the odds of getting COVID are much lower when you can social distance and you're not all crowded together, which is why so many people did mail-in votes this year, is because of the feeling of not feeling safe mail-in voting. That's why they mail-in voting.
All right. Caleb, would you like to respond to that?
I don't have to respond to that, but I do want something to add on. I think mail-in voting was a big part of the reason why we've seen such a high voter turnout this year. I'm sure there are other factors that went into it as well, but the fact that it was more accessible for more people to vote, I think, is part of the reason why we've seen this increased voter turnout like we've never seen before. That wasn't more a response to her, it was more just an add-on to what I was saying.
A little follow-up question for Destiny. If you think we open up more early mail-in vote or early in-person voting days, should we almost completely get rid of mail-in voting or make it only for the necessities?
I feel like it should be only for the necessities. In my personal opinion, I think it should not just be sent to everyone. I think you should have to request it. If there are more if you're able to go to a polling station, you should do that. As in if you're elderly, disabled, or are at high risk for the coronavirus, you should not be forced, nor is that my intention to make you think you have to do that. But I do agree with the fact that they should not just get rid of it, because that wouldn't benefit the people who need that. It would hurt them. And then the military, if they're not home, they mail in their votes by request, and that wouldn't be right for them not to have that option.
All right. Caleb, I'll give you the opportunity to respond.
I agree with the part where she stated the people who need it should be able to vote by mail, obviously. Where I disagree is that even if you don't have an excuse, even if you don't have a particular reason as to why you want to mail in vote, you don't have to have a disability to want to mail in vote. You don't have to want to fear the COVID. I mean, you should, but the coronavirus, you should take precautions, but you don't have to have those particular reasons to vote by mail. You should be able to vote by mail if you so choose to. There shouldn't be restrictions stopping you from voting by mail. If you prefer to vote by mail, you shouldn't have to give anybody an excuse as to why. That's your decision, it's your vote, and you can vote how you want.
All right, Destiny.
Yes, I agree with what you say. I'm just saying it should be by request. It's not just everyone mail and vote for you, mail and vote for you. I think you should have to request it.
All right. There's been some strong arguments with this case, but now we will move on to our fourth question, which has kind of been relating to what we've been stating already. Some people who are sick, overseas, or other things like that cannot get to the votes physically to make their votes. So, what do you suggest we do for these people, or people who are not reaching the level that it takes to come in if there was restrictions? Destiny, you can start this.
I think they should be allowed to mail and vote by request, and I think that there are certain precautions that they should have to take. I think a pen should be provided. That way, if they're doing the mail and vote, I want to make sure that their vote counts, because everybody has a voice, and I just know everybody wants to be heard. With that also being said, will you repeat the second part of the question, please?
Second part of the question. So, is there going to be a limit that you have to have this certain amount of disability in order to have a mail-in voting, or where will the line be drawn as to yes you can or no you can't?
I feel like you should be able to mail in vote as long as you request it. It shouldn't just be sent out to everyone. As long as you request it, I think you should be allowed to vote that way.
Caleb, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would. I don't think, to be frankly honest with you, there should be much of a line drawn for mail-in voting. You don't, like I previously stated, you don't have to be disabled to vote by mail. You don't have to do any of that. Actually, in my opinion, them sending it out to everybody isn't necessarily a bad idea. That is part of the reason we've seen such a high turnout, is because they sent it to everybody. And as far as I remember, do you have to request when you go to an in-person voting? Do you have to request to vote in person? No. So why would you have to request to vote by mail? And it's not like you can vote twice by mail. They don't count that. And same thing with, if you cannot go in person and vote by mail, you can't do that. Each person gets one vote, whether they send it to everybody or you request it or not. When they send it to you, send it to everybody, you can just throw it away if you choose to. It's not hurting you. That's the point I am trying to make. When they send a mail-in ballot to everybody, if you choose to vote by mail, choose to vote by mail. If you choose not to vote at all, or you choose to, which you should vote, but if you choose not to vote at all, or you choose that you want to vote in person, dump the ballot. It's not gonna do anything. Just don't fill it out and send it in. Just let people vote as they please, and whether they request it or not.
So do you think we should encourage more people to vote, though, so that everybody can truly have an opinion? Or should we just let people not vote if it's not in mail-in voting?
No, what I'm saying is we encourage people to vote no matter how they want to vote. Whether they want to vote by person or in person, or whether they want to vote by mail, let them vote. That, at the end of the day, that's all I genuinely care about, is every single American who is eligible to vote. They have a way to vote, whether they want Whether they want to vote by mail or in person, they can vote, and it's their choice. They do not need to give the government or anybody an excuse as to why they are voting by mail. If they want to vote by mail, they say they want to vote by mail. They don't have to be on a disability to vote by mail. Of course, mail-in voting will help them, but you don't have to have that to vote by mail, I believe.
How specifically should we encourage people to vote?
By giving them more opportunities to vote, and mail-in voting is a perfect opportunity to vote. Before, when there was only in-person voting, a lot of the people who couldn't get to the polling stations or who didn't have the time, voter turnout was not the greatest in 2016, as many people will remember. And voter turnout was actually substantially high this time, higher than any other election in American history, and that is because of mail-in voting, simply due to the fact it's easier, and that is encouraging people to vote. The fact that they sent it to everybody meant everybody got a say, and not everybody took advantage of that say, and some people, voted in person, which is completely fine. Other people voted by mail. So if anything, more people are having a say in our democracy because of mail-in voting.
Thank you very much for that, Caleb. Destiny, would you like to respond?
Yes, you said that that they did not count if you mailed in vote and went to the polling station vote. Do you have any evidence to back that up?
No.
Okay.
But do you have any evidence to disprove
Yes, I do. I'm getting there. Wait a minute. So in the 2016 election, New York Times said, let me find the exact quote. People could send in these mail-in votes because you did not need to prove that you are that person. This is called voter impersonation. There are already lawsuits against, this is like now, it says, there are already lawsuits complaining against that have been submitted. That is not from New York Times, but this next quote is from New York Times in 2016. They said, do not mail in your votes. They are more likely to be compromised. And that is from New York Times in the 2016 election when they encouraged people not to vote by mail-in votes. Yet this year they did, and they said that it is almost nearly impossible for a vote to be fraudulent now. I think they totally flipped that. I don't think that makes much sense.
Destiny, so that was prior to the national pandemic, right, though?
Yes. However, I think if it was easy to compromise then, and they weren't sending mail-in votes to everyone, how easy would it be to compromise now when they are sending them to absolutely more people than people didn't request them? So I feel like it would be easier to request to compromise. You also said, I agreed how you said that people should be able to vote by mail and that they shouldn't have to request that. But if you requested it, I feel like the odds of it being fraudulent goes way more down. No, you do not have to request to mail in person, but the states that have been doing mail-in voting for a while, you still need to request them. These states are Wisconsin, Hawaii, and others, as you know, but you still have to request them. They aren't just sent out to everybody. You have to request them to mail and vote. And that's why with their evidence, it shows that they aren't fraudulent because they do request mail-in votes.
Destiny, one question for you. Do you have any evidence showing that the voter fraud is the highest that it's ever been?
Well, I don't think I've ever heard of a cat getting a vote before, or there's so many underage people that have gotten things to vote, and I've not really heard of that before when I was researching it. Yes, there were some claims, but there weren't as many as there was this time. So,
but you're the one who brought that up, that specific topic.
Yeah, that's why I said that. I'm not understanding your question then.
All right, so moving on to Caleb, would you like to rebuttal that?
Yes, you stated that this has become a public story. Must be if it's well known that a ballot was sent to a cat or underage people. But since this has become public, those votes I assume were not counted.
No, those votes were probably not counted. However, what's stopping other people's votes like that?
But if they were not counted, then that means these scenarios that are fraudulent are getting caught. These scenarios where people are voting fraudulent, people are finding this stuff out and they're not counting it. So these votes are, well, it's a fraudulent attempt, but they have not succeeded.
Yes, Destiny, you may respond.
Okay, yes, they're fraudulent attempts. How many attempts? how many attempts have to be made in order for them to be a count? What are the odds that all the attempts that were made were caught? That's just all I'm trying to say. I agree with what you're saying, though.
May I respond?
I'm sorry, repeat?
She made a point. May I respond?
Yes, of course.
Yes, but the odds are less than 1%, according to the New York Times survey this year, in an article this year. But that's not to say in-person voting isn't completely fraudulent-free either. And the fact that this is just limited to somehow mail-in voting is the only thing that can be fraudulent. Is, in my opinion, frankly wrong. Because yes, I did not deny the fact that mail-in voting, there are instances of fraud, as she had brought up. But as I had previously stated, that is less than 1%. So there's always, of course, there's going to be examples of fraud no matter how you vote. But the odds are so substantially low. And go back to your point, when you said in 2016, when they were discouraging mail-in voting, look at the turnout in that election as well. And now look at the turnout in this election when they were encouraging mail-in voting in 2020. Turnout was through the roof, like substantially larger than 2016 when they were discouraging mail-in votes. So obviously they realized they were wrong in 2016 for discouraging it. And now we have a pandemic on our hands and we are encouraging those to mail-in vote. And as you see, the impacts have been overall very positive. But of course you can find examples all over the place, but you can find examples for in-person voting as well.
All right, thank you both very much for that. We are going to move on now. We would like to say that we did fact check the cat situation, and we did find evidence that that is true, that were ballots sent to cats. AP and Washington Post confirmed that. But now we are going to take a short 30-second break or so. We'll be back after these messages. Hello and welcome back once again to Up for Debate. I'm Jocelyn Decker and we're discussing the topic of mail-in voting. So, things have been pretty heated so far in our debate as we move on to our last question. So, question number 5 for both candidates is, wondering about the trustworthiness of mail-in voting, some other questions have arose about different ways of voting, such as online voting. What is your opinion of online voting, and do you think it could be an option in the future? This one, Caleb may start.
Oh, it's going to take a lot of work before we get there. So I do see that being a possibility in the future, probably the near future actually, maybe 4 or 8 years. That's something we got to be careful about though. Because for all the complaints that you can make about mail-in voting, they're more prevalent in online voting. More vulnerability in online voting. However, with a bit of time and a bit of practice, I think it'll become a mainstream way of voting eventually, and I look forward to that. I just think we have steps to take before we get there, but I definitely think we are well on our way to getting to online voting, and it is an idea that intrigues me. greatly, and maybe someday we can get to that point. I look forward to it.
All right, thank you very much, Caleb. Destiny, what's your take?
I agree with what you said on how there are going to be more problems with online voting just because how would that work? Not everybody has internet connection. Would you be able to go to a library to vote? I'm sure somebody would be able to get online, like it was just your computer you can vote from, your phone, how would all that go down? I feel like it will not be as soon as Caleb thinks. I think it'll take a bit, and I'm sure that once that's allowed, there will be another up for debate on whether or not online voting will be allowed. But other than that, I'm not completely against it. I just think that there should be some restrictions that they're obviously going to have to figure out in the future.
So do you think it relates sort of to how mail-in voting is now with the questions of how trustworthy mail-in voting is? Do you think that'll be questions in the future when online voting may become an option?
Almost certainly. I definitely see that being a question of how trustworthy it will be because we all want our voices to be heard and we all want it to be fair and make sure that everything's going smoothly the way it should be. And I think that there's no guarantee, no matter how you vote, that things are going as smoothly as you would like.
All right. Caleb, would you have anything to add to it?
For the most part, I agree with what she said. I do think it'll be sooner than she thinks. Only because we live in a very fast-changing world. I mean, think about it. Like 8 years ago, 4 years ago, we never would have thought that mail-in voting would have such a substantial role in this election. So never count out the impossible. Never count out the impossible because in 4 years from now, we could have two people up here debating online voting, and I think, like as Destiny had stated, so while it's not likely in 4 years, I would say 8 years, maybe. I think there'd be there's a possibility of it, and whether there is or isn't, as long as people can vote, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, and it's a safe and fair way to vote.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Would you have any closing on that, Destiny?
I do not have a rebuttal.
All right. Then I guess we'll be moving on to our closing statements. We'd first like to thank both of you for participating today. You've both been very fair, and it has been an honor to be your moderator. So we will start the wrap up with Destiny.
I'd like to thank you, Caleb. You made some very, very valid points. I do see why you are for mail-in voting. However, that does not change my opinion. And I do not believe they are very accurate with this year with dead people being sent the votes along with animals and underage people. Mail-in votes not being requested, just sent to everyone. Yes, mail-in voting would be a good way for elderly people with a high risk to vote or people who just don't want to go as long as they request it. This way, not everyone is getting a mail-in vote. It would make the process of the mail-in vote the process of mail-in voting way more accurate in my opinion. And I'd also like to thank you, Jocelyn, for moderating and everybody who joined us for our episode of Up for Debate.
All right, thank you for that closing statement. Caleb, you may speak.
Yes, thank you, Destiny, for letting me hear the other side, but like you, my opinion has not changed greatly. Thank you, Jocelyn, for moderating this debate and being a fair moderator. It's hard to come by these days. Thank you to everybody else who helped to put this wonderful, fair debate together. I greatly appreciate that. Mail-in voting, if there's one thing that you can take away from this debate, and that's this. No matter how you vote, whether that be in person or whether that be by mail, vote. Let your voice be heard. Do not let anybody suppress your vote. Whether you want to vote in person or by mail, make sure your vote is counted. If you are elderly or if you have disabilities and you cannot get to the polling stations, do not be afraid to vote by mail, whether you request it or it is sent to you. Take advantage of that opportunity to vote. If you do not have the time to get to the polling stations, take advantage of that opportunity to vote. Vote, because your voice being heard is how we can change the future for the better. This is how progress is made. Progress is not made when people do not vote. So I hope to see this trend of high voter turnout elections continue. I hope to see an even higher turnout in 2024 and an increased turnout in 2028. Just no matter what or no matter how you vote, just make sure to vote. Mail-in voting, While you can find fraudulent activity in it, you can find fraudulent activity in anything you do, including in-person voting. Do not let that discourage you from voting how you want to vote to make your voice be heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Caleb. That was quite the ending. We also want to thank you, the viewers, and everyone else who helped put this together for watching this amazing show today and helping put it on. Currently, we are working here at Up for Debate to change the debate format to make it more fair for everyone and to inform the public on specific topics. As do the COVID regulations, please make sure to maintain a distance of 6 feet, as well as wearing your mask when in public. Thank you so much for watching. I am Jocelyn Decker, and this has been Up for Debate.
Yeah.